I don't want to, and I'm trying my best to avoid it. But you kind of look at the ether, you look at the YouTube algorithm, you look at what other people are looking up, and so much of it's focused on, again, what makes a good conversation? How do I become more interesting? How do I avoid being boring in a conversation? I can understand the intent behind looking at communication and framing it in that way. After all, who wants to be boring? Of course, everybody would like to be more interesting. But if you focus too much on that, you're going to have diminishing returns. And even if you get good at being interesting in that way, if you can manage to avoid being boring in that manner that is outlined in those aspects, you're not really going to be satisfied and fulfilled at the end of the day. You're going to be able to do it. You're going to be able to do it in your sleep. But eventually, if you can wake up from it, you'll get to the point of, why am I talking in that way? I get nothing out of that. So if you can earlier on divert your attention to, wait, who am I talking to? And why am I talking to this person? If you don't care, then yeah, why are you doing it? It makes no difference to be boring or interesting in that regard. Being able to cultivate and handle small talk for someone who's really introverted, someone who's really shy, someone who's never engaged into those speaking dynamics before in their life, you're going to get some satisfaction over it. But you can't be fulfilled by the small talk conversations of, hey, oh man, it's really cold outside. Oh man, I didn't get my coffee today. I'm so sleepy. Why do you want to be good at that conversation? That's not real conversation. When you're speaking to communicate, not to impress. Because if you're properly communicating, it doesn't have to be the deepest bond, but you're making some kind of connection with a person. And a genuine connection with another person is much more forgiving. Your closest friends, your family members that you get along with, you have awkward silences that you don't even pick up on because nobody cares. The connection is set right there. Is it harder to do that with a stranger, somebody you just met? Of course, right? But then if you go into that interaction, putting all that pressure, you have to be an entertainer, essentially. The highs might feel higher, but the lows are going to hit you way, way, way worse. And you don't want to be in that situation where you devastate yourself, because it's just not that kind of interaction. So much of my coaching tries to pull people away from academic, the academic bubble, thinking and pass and fail in that regard. But if you want to be studious, a lot of this communication growth comes around to exposure. I think if you yourself are exposed to lots of boring conversations you want to get out of, conversations that you're tired of, that's ammunition for you on things to avoid. But it takes a little bit of proactive thinking there to reflect and be aware of those aspects, because for every person let's talk about this very specific situation. Everybody hates work meetings, right? They drone on and on and on. 9 times out of 10, work meetings never start on time. But the people who hate that part about meetings the most, whenever it's their turn to leave the meeting, do they do anything differently? Or do they run through the exact same type of motions? Again, I would say 9 times out of 10, they repeat the exact same mistakes, because to recognize and to adapt are 2 different types of skills. Now, luckily in conversation, you could potentially get more practice at that. You could have more wiggle room. You get a little bit more dynamic room to play around with that. So it's really up to you how far you want to push it. If you shoot your sights onto this ideal of I want to be a conversationalist, I want to be so good at communication, I want to, really razzle dazzle. I really want to wow people. I really want people to be impressed with the way I speak. I don't know what your practice method might look like. You could be really strict. You could be really hard on yourself. You might dedicate a lot of time. I don't know you is the main thing. So I don't know what's going through your mind, how you might approach it. And you could get really, really good at that. But here's this other outlier. What is very interesting to certain people is going to be boring to other people. What is boring to other people might be super fascinating and interesting to other people. So if you just try to categorize these things as this is automatically good, this is automatically bad, you're going to have diminishing returns. You might be exposed to certain situations where, wow, that always works. Wow, that really worked. I can always count on this. But then eventually, one day, you're going to encounter that situation where what you thought would work, what you thought would be universally accepted, crashes. And if you're not ready for that, again, the highs are high, but the lows are going to be really low. And I don't want to be so dramatic to say that you won't ever recover from it, but that's just like an unnecessary pain that you would be exposing yourself to when, what kind of game are you even playing? Like, communication isn't even about that. Communication could be that way. Again, like if we look at YouTube, if we look at all these people who are improving, like these metrics, like if you go by that rubric of interesting and boring, there are things that you can categorize. You can make a list. Like if we compare notes, we can say, yes, this seems to be interesting. Talking about traveling the world on paper seems more interesting than taking care of your bills, right? Yeah, like who would disagree with that? But if I'm talking with my friend, and why am I talking to my friend? I care about them. I haven't caught up with my friend in a while. I want to see what's going on with my friend. And my friend brings up concerns because they have a hard time taking care of their bills this month. Holiday season is really rough for a lot of people. I'm trying to be conscious of language here. Why the heck would I talk about travel right there? Even though, I thought talking about traveling would be way more interesting than talking about their bills. Maybe it would have been a good distraction. No, like why would you try to deviate from that point? That's losing the focus in essence of who am I talking to and why am I talking to this person? So, another point that I always try to hammer in, context matters. And maybe this example is really obvious. For you, you'd be like, well, John, that's not what I'm talking about. That's not what I'm worried about. I would never, ever make that mistake. Good. Leave a comment to let me know that you have quote unquote common sense in that way. I feel ever since I started this channel and being exposed to way more groups, especially in the professional environment, like common sense doesn't really exist. People are too passive to express otherwise, maybe. You really have to treat communication, language, connecting with other people as its own kind of living, breathing organism. You're not treating people like people, okay? You're kind of getting too caught up in your own head. And again, when things work, you might get that reinforcement of like, well, what is John talking about? Like, of course there's a perfect way to do this. This is the exquisite way. Like, I'm going to impress everybody. Like, John doesn't know what he's talking about. You're kind of living in a fantasy. You're cutting yourself off to like live and experience dialogue in a certain kind of bubble. And there's a lot of pressure in that environment. Essentially, you always have to be on. You have to be on, like charismatic or aware or entertaining or funny, or you have to be up and up and up and up. And you might have more pressure bubbling underneath the surface to outdo yourself every single time. Versus, who am I talking to? Why am I talking to this person? My friend who's concerned about his bills. I want to comfort them. I might not always know what to say, but I can recognize that. And at the heart of the matter, I want to be a good friend to this person. And I know I can be a good friend to this person. And nothing can shake that. So even though I might not have the right words to say something comforting right now, that's always going to be my guiding compass. And I can always come back to that. And I could be concerned. I can feel bad that I can't say something better at this time and moment. But I'm not going to bring my insecurity and worry to my friend in that way. I can ask them, hey, is there anything I can do for you? If you need anything, let me know. But I kind of hate how that's kind of like a catch-all phrase that we say these days, because depending on your bond and connection with a friend, that's a separate piece of work. You establish that bond, you establish that connection so that your friend, when they hear you say, if you need anything, let me know, they know that you mean it. There's no special magic word that will take care of that. It's building experience with them. You bond with them over time in repeated experiences, in repeated exposure. Okay, it's not a one-line word that you say. Because otherwise, if the connection really isn't there, it's not really solid. Hearing, hey, if you need anything, let me know, it becomes annoying because, wow, like, I'm suffering right now. I'm dealing with my own crap. And now I have to think about what you need to be doing for me. See, like, this is another example of like how learning supposedly good phrase to use, yeah, it's fluent, a lot of people say it, can backfire you stupendously. So focus again on who you're talking to, why you're talking to them, and if you really cultivate that relationship, if that's even a relationship that you want to cultivate, doesn't have to be the strongest. You don't have to become best friends. You don't have to, be in the mix with the suffering 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Again, going back to that superficial reason where you want people to like you so that you get the promotion, or you want to talk to this person because you have a funny joke and you know it's funny and you want to see if you can make them laugh. That's a setup right there. That's being honest. I want to see if I can make this person laugh. That's much better than, oh, I don't want to be boring. How can I be interesting? Okay, so get away from those words. If you have never talked to anybody in your life, maybe that's a domain where you can use those metrics. Like, it makes sense for you to want to be curious about what's boring versus what's interesting. But this intermediate space, getting more proficient in communication, advancing your communication, talking to more and more people, it's such a limiting way of viewing it. And the art of communication doesn't mean anything if you have no regard for the individuals that you're speaking to. It always comes back down to the people. Okay, so that's going to be the rant for today. Again, appreciate you guys sticking with this. Questions or comments, leave them below.